Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is Tim McCarthy, who's written a very readable and worthwhile book. The name of it is Empty Abundance, Finding Meaning Through Mindful Giving. Tim runs a private foundation, The Business of Good, funded by his fortune and several other successful for-profit enterprises. Drawing on a lifetime of lessons learned, Empty Abundance offers readers an avenue into deeper meaning, greater self-realization, and the enduring riches of service to others. Tim, welcome to the program.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
Let's start at the beginning because you quote my favorite author of all time, Scott Peck, in The Road Less Traveled, who says, life is difficult.
Yes, indeed it is.
Mm-hmm. So, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask it. So suffering has got to be a part of life at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we got that too, John, from the Buddha, 2,500 years before we got it from Peck, you know?
Yeah.
And it's certainly true for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly has. I should just speak for me. It's been true for me.
Mm-hmm. In that same chapter, you talk about emptiness, that we're going to encounter that in our culture because we cling to stuff. Material abundance is very much an obsession in our culture, maybe more than other cultures even.
So Dr. Peck's answer, similarly to the Buddha's answer, was it's not the suffering, it's not the pain that ruins us. It's the clinging to the pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the joy that bothers us. It's the clinging to the joy. So the direct answer to your good question is neither the pain or the joy is bad of itself. Mm-hmm. It's only bad when we hang on to it. And in America, we tend to believe that next car or that next relationship or that next whatever is going to solve whatever problems we actually have from within. Mm-hmm. It's just not true. That's why we stick with stuff. That's why Americans, as wealthy as we are, as a people, continue to be such apes of misery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, attachment is part of the story that you introduced so well. This is what made me think what a page-turner this is. It started with the three key parts of your history. Fired from a job at 34, had your assets business frozen at 43, and became extraordinarily wealthy at 54 in one day. So let's take it through that, because that's hard to believe unless you read the story here.
Well, it's just my story is not different than Dr. Cook's story, which is not different from every person's story. And that is, each one of us have those events that you just described. Mine happened to be I was fired from a job, my assets were frozen, and one day somebody electronically transferred me $45 million. I mean, maybe someone else's highs and lows were higher or lower, but it doesn't matter. That's what the book's about. The book is just how do you deal with whatever comes your way, because it's not like any of us. What was Will Rogers' old line? I've experienced great tragedy in my life, some of which actually happened. You know, it's like we all go through stuff, and it's not what the stuff we go through that's the issue. It's how we relate to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a short version through some of that excitement. So you worked for a large restaurant chain for a while in marketing, and you had a great income at the time, $150,000, and your wife and 3 children were moved to a new town, and it was a pretty big deal. And then the company got themselves into chaos and bought and sold, and eventually you were fired.
3 days before Christmas, 1987.
Wow.
Unforgettable, because I had 3 little kids, 4, 7, and 8. And here's the great irony. I was the ultimate consumer that I'm talking about in Empty Abundance, because I had made what's the equivalent of $300,000 a year back then and hadn't saved a dime, John. Mm-hmm. Not a dime. Mm-hmm. So I was out in the woods 3 days before Christmas wondering what the heck had happened to me. You know, what train had just hit me. Worse, you know, you get to wondering, is life over? I mean, is all this stuff I worked for and getting up to that big job and that big salary, and it goes away in a day, and it was totally unexpected. I didn't expect to get fired. Then you start wondering, holy cow, Is this it for me?
And feeling devastated, there's a line in the book that I underlined twice: "Sweet perspective, thy name is children."
So you like the part about when I was in collecting my stuff that night,
Yeah.
my kids were throwing paper airplanes off the third floor lobby,
Mm-hmm.
which reminded me not to take it too seriously, John.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of coming back to exactly what you started the interview with, is what Dr. Peck was trying to tell us in The Road Less Traveled. It's not what life throws you that's going to mess you up. It's how you cling to it.
Mm-hmm. You introduce a term that I was unfamiliar with, anhedonia. Is that correct pronunciation?
Yes, sir, it is.
And that's an emptiness, a lack of pleasure derived from material things, and that has plagued you from time to time in your life.
Oh, to the point of what I considered near insanity. I mean, I don't know how sanity is defined even, but I found myself even physically completely debilitated. I think depression hits a lot of us harder than we think it does, and we just get on that treadmill thinking the next thing's going to satisfy us, and that's what anhedonia is. It's this crazy word that's fun because it aptly describes that little, and I guess this is the fun of it, John, in a talk with a guy like you that reached so many important thinkers, because NPR is a place for thinkers, is what's that little void? The reason I dedicated a chapter to anhedonia is I didn't even know how to describe it. And I don't think most people do. This is the point of the book. Can I help you find what it is that's that nagging doubt in your mind?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I have a family, I have a house, I have, 2 nice cars, and I still am not having very much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's anhedonia.
So at one point you describe it as lower intensity but longer lasting form of depression. And
yes, sir.
And you even tried to attribute it to your Irish nature of chronic melancholy.
Boy, you really did read.
It's a great discussion, and I think your wife Alice was helpful in this regard, although, when you describe yourself as type A, she says no AAA. So she's got you pegged pretty well, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I was the ultimate achiever, John. I mean, a lot of your listeners, maybe you yourself, is admired by outsiders because they are always accomplished something, always taking care of people, always, the good guy in the room, whatever. I certainly achieved all that. But there was a terrible emptiness inside me as I kept on chasing harder and harder. The goal seemed to get farther and farther away, and that's when I slipped into what actually was ultimately medically diagnosed as dysthymia, mm-hmm. which is that lower, longer-lasting form of depression.
And you had an experience of what seemed like heart attacks during some of that time, lightheaded and dizzy feelings.
Yes, to the point where they even, I had a heart catheterization because they couldn't find out what the cause was. And the punchline in the book is when I went back to the doctor after the heart catheterization, proved out there was nothing wrong with my heart and said, okay, now what do we do? And he says, you're going to a psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, that's a problem because I don't believe in psychiatrists. And he said, well, you better start believing.
Right, yeah. Very good.
Yeah. Well, John, I would imagine, and you're a professor too, right?
Yes.
So you've been in the type of deep discussion that I try to deal with in the book, which is how can we seem to accomplish so much and feel like we accomplish so little? And I think that's uniquely American. I mean, maybe Western Europe, but in most of the developing countries, like it was here 150 years ago, people are pretty occupied by surviving, and so they don't have this incredible abundance that we have in America. I mean, we're by 4 times the most wealthy society. And so it just always struck me as ironic that here I was, one of those very wealthy, doing well Americans. Plus, I had 9 brothers and sisters who loved me and, 3 kids and a woman I'm still married to 39 years later. And yet I felt empty. the whole thing I'm trying to wrestle with in the book, and that's the deep discussion that deserves to be had.
The money can't buy happiness thing. You had some studies that I found interesting. The Princeton study found that life satisfaction rises with income, but that everyday happiness changes little once you reach $75,000 a year. After that, it's just, we're just accumulating, and it's not that much. And those with excess income, whether it's from the lottery or making a big salary, find themselves using the money to search for fulfillment that never arrives.
Yeah. And so have you ever had that feeling, John?
Oh, I have done some things that parallel yours, including building and losing a business and going into bankruptcy and some other things and thinking, oh, this is the end. What'll I do now? So, yeah, I know whereof you speak.
Yeah, and I think most of us do, because I think, and that's why I'm so glad you found the book interesting, is because all I want to do is get a further dialogue going among people that are interested. It seems to me that I have found a way fairly skillfully, and it's through a number of different things that I share in the book, to deal with what all of us deal with. It's not like only a guy that got blessed with millions is the guy that deal with it. It's not like, only the person who has a relatively happy family. All of us deal with it, John. Mm-hmm. That's why Peck was so brilliant in his writings, because he related to all of us in The Road Less Traveled and some of his other work. Mm-hmm. These are common things. All of us get that feeling of striving. All of us get that feeling of, why am I doing more and getting more and enjoying it less,
And maybe that ties into the second illness we have to confront sometimes, and that's a nationwide affliction known as addiction.
Yes, sir.
And anhedonia might be a root cause of some addictions, right?
Well, indeed, and John, we're not even talking about the ones you would normally figure we're talking about. It's not about alcoholism or drug addiction, or it's even some of the things that I wrestled with and still wrestle with. Mm-hmm. All the distractions in my life. I have to have my iPhone right at my eyeballs. I'm like everybody else since these cool things came into existence. I've got to have it with me all the time, even when I'm having dinner with my family. What? Mm-hmm. What? Why? 3 cups of great, local coffee is not enough. I got to have 5 of them.
Yeah.
What? What? Until I start shaking, and then I don't deal with people very well once I'm all wired up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So simple addictions are pretty common among all of us.
I liked the $1 trillion breakdown. Americans in 2011 spent $20 billion on coffee, $100 billion on cell phone data, $210 billion on beer, $406 billion on restaurants, and that's just consumer spending. That doesn't count what's spent on advertising for us to buy more every day.
Yeah, but the punchline to all that, and this is the part I love, and because it took me forever to learn it. That doesn't say any of those things are bad.
Right.
It just says my learning was over time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad to do the restaurants or do the beer or do the coffee or do the whatever, unless you're, truly an addict. What's bad is actually thinking that the more you do of those, the happier you'll be. Mm-hmm. A good thing's a good thing.
Yeah. And one of the addictions we have is wealth addiction. Let's talk about that for a minute, too. That's a book by Phil Slater, or he coined that term.
Yeah. And it's the most insidious one in my view, John, and that's probably where I center a lot of the book on. And again, I try to pull from history of people like Andrew Carnegie or actually I think it was Mark Twain. Those are famous people from over 100 years ago who dealt with the same wealth addictions. Well, now it's even crazier because you got guys and women that are making $1 billion a year, as hedge fund managers. Mm-hmm. So there's where I go into that whole wealth addiction thing in the book, John, is just discussing what is out there, both in terms of research, like you mentioned before, because there's been a lot of studies on it, and then by good authors like Mr. Slater, and then good examples like Carnegie and Twain. Again, abundance is good, but when you take it to an extreme, maybe not so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Wall Street banker Sam Polk, who had a bonus of $3.6 million. He was 30. He had no children, no debts, no philanthropy goal. But he was mad that his bonus was only $3.6 million.
Yeah. And do you remember his punchline? He said, I needed the next million for the same reason an alcoholic needs another drink.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't need another million because I wasn't using the 3.6 I got, but I was mad because I thought I should get 4.6 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it gets crazy. That's where it becomes a circular thing that drives us to our anhedonia.
So two of our afflictions are anhedonia and addiction. The third culprit is a societal affliction is despair. Let's talk about despair.
So despair to me was finding out that it was my only enemy. So my enemy wasn't, the people that closed my business when they froze my assets. My enemy certainly wasn't my brothers and sisters that were rough on me at times, but, my enemy was not my boss who fired me.
Mm-hmm.
My enemy was giving up at any of those given times, and that's, I think, another thing that affects us all. I mean, we're always invited to despair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talk about enemies, and you cite my favorite quote from Pogo: "We have met the enemy, and he is us."
It's the reason that thing lasts so long, because that was probably 30, 40 years ago,
yes.
is because it's so true.
Mm-hmm.
It's so true.
Now, you suggest that part of the treatment for these societal trials is service, and talk a good bit about service in this book.
Yes, and here's the punchline to service being the antidote. Service, when taken in its proper context, is actually selfish. I don't go out and do all these things. All of my income every year goes to, other than, Alice and I live in a nice life, which we take some living expenses for, but all of my income, which is substantial, goes right into the foundation. Well, do you think I do that because I'm a noble guy? Truly, John, I mean, you laugh, but I'm telling you, I'm not a noble guy. I do it because it makes me feel great.
Mm-hmm.
Just the same reason, and that's why it pertains to somebody with no money as much as to me, just the same as examples I use in the book of people who have no money but volunteer at the local library or volunteer at a hospice or something like that. The only ones of us that get service wrong is the antidote, is the people that take it too seriously. The ones that really know, like my friends that really enjoy the hospice, and I have a lot of friends who give their time there, is they know that when they leave there, they feel better about themselves.
And you've had some influential priests in your life that have sort of pulled you into doing some of this service from time to time, which you later were glad you did.
Yes. And my favorite priest was the one who taught me to do it with a laugh. And I tell a story in the book of the time he and I were going to a tough meeting, and when I picked him up, he was in a full clown outfit. This is a Catholic priest going to a serious spirit meeting, and he's in a full costume. The shoes, the red nose, the painted face, the wig, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Norm, go get dressed. We got to get to that meeting. And he went to the car. I said, Norm, what are you doing? He said, man, it could get tough down there tonight. Let's try to keep the guys light. So sure enough, here we were in a very serious service meeting, where everybody's trying to be save the world, and he's making us all laugh in his clown outfit. That's back to the point.
That's
back
great.
To the point of service that is in the middle ground. It's not the service of I'm gonna serve so hard that I actually become bitter, nor is it, hey, I don't do service. It's that middle ground, like Father Norm and a couple of the other priests I mentioned showed me.
Mm-hmm.
It's that middle ground of doing what you can do, doing it lovingly, doing it with a light hand, and making yourself feel better as a result.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the life lessons that you've taken forward from your own life. How about your little sister Janie?
The blessings of Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So Jane was kept at our house by my mom and dad, even though there were 9 other kids. She was the 10th of the 10 that my mom and dad had, and she, as so many challenged children have now, autism is a thing that's seen pretty broadly, and thankfully most often kept in the family home. Not only was Jane given a chance to become more of a person by being around the 9 of us, as my mom liked to say, all 9 of us became better people. So Jane was the lesson in patience. Jane was the lesson in living in the now. She would, often we'd be all upset about something, and she'd be asking us, how our day was.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, the great lessons from someone who has greater challenges from us is another lesson of the book, and that is to see how another person reacts to the same stimuli. In this case, it was Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you perspective.
Mm-hmm. And your dad was quite a service-oriented medical professional. He attended patients' minds and spirits, and I remember the story about the terminally ill patient, and he wrote a prescription for M&Ms. But also the fact that he didn't give people second billings. If they couldn't pay, he just let it go.
Yeah, which sadly for us meant we weren't as rich as the other doctors mm-hmm. in the neighborhood and in town. And I probably didn't get the lesson until I was in my late 20s. But I finally got the lesson, and that was he had a lot more fun serving people and still did well. We still had plenty of food on the table, 2 nice cars, a nice home on Lake Erie. He gave me that lesson of that middle ground. Service to those people was his joy and his pride. But he also did well enough that, he never suffered, financially.
Yeah, I think it was maybe when you did your mom's last interview was when he said that he was wealthy because of his kids and his nice house and his 5 siblings. He got what he needed to get for y'all.
Yeah, and yet he didn't respect his medical doctor brother, who literally did European trips all the time, belonged to the wonderful country club, and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't like he was judging his brother, but on the other hand, he just felt like he had plenty.
Mm-hmm. Now, the lesson for you when you wanted a bike was a pretty good one as well.
So the put it very short. Thanks for noticing. To put it in the shortest form I can. I think one of the mistakes we Americans make with our children is that we think since we've, let's say, made it, because we have enough money that our kids don't have to work, that should be why they don't work. And even though we were doing well by the time the kids were teenagers, Alice and I decided to make them work. Well, it was from my dad's lesson, which you pointed out. Because I guess we didn't really need to work either. He would have taken care of us and let sports be the thing or whatever. But instead, he decided we should all have paper routes and we could all caddy at the local country club. And his message was simply brought to me by the fact that once I bought my bike with my own money, instead of all the other kids on my street that were given bikes, it meant more to me. And that lesson still just reverberates like crazy. You didn't expect them to, feed the family, but on the other hand, we expected them to learn that, nights at work can be lousy and sometimes they can be fun. Supervisors can be real creeps and some supervisors can be good. And, Uncle Sam takes a lot out of your paycheck. And, you learn those lessons of life that you need for later on in life.
So I really do want to get to this theme of the title of the book. Basically, you're saying that once you've gained a comfortable lifestyle, piling up more money really is empty abundance. And in fact, I think, was it your mother that said wealth is a burden? Was it?
It was indeed. Uh-huh. It was indeed. And all she meant was, well, actually, I'll stick with the first part of what you said. How much of what we have is beyond what fills our tank. And the analogy I use is, after your tank's full, do you need to still keep pouring gas all over the tarmac?
Mm-hmm.
No, you stop the pump and you put it back in the pump, and you got plenty of gas to get around. I think that's a great metaphor or analogy, or whatever the right word is. John, you probably know better than me. For what we do in America with our empty abundance, we've got enough, and instead of tending, therefore, to the things like relationships and other things that don't have any money required, we keep on chasing more money. And to me, it's like spilling gas on the tarmac after your tank's full.
Yeah, and I know that you make mention of the billionaires who are following Warren Buffett's advice and leaving something for their children, but really taking all the abundance that they've accumulated and putting it back into the system to help others.
There's some cool cats that have billions. 114 of them, as of today, my friend, are giving more than half of their fortune to charity during and after their lives. Well, that's just as cool in my mind as my my young friend cited in the book who teaches hip hop, because he came out of the projects, and he teaches hip hop voluntarily most nights after work. So that he can help people that were in similar situations when he was a kid learn skills, life skills. Yeah, it's like the rich or the poor or the in between. Everybody has a chance to have a more meaningful life if they just have part of their life. Yeah, good, get some more money and have a nicer car or whatever. But anything more than that, you'll have a lot more fun if you serve instead of just piling up more cars or whatever it is that you dig.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take about a minute and sort of summarize the work of the Business of Good, this foundation that you have, what you're up to with that.
Okay. We found our niche after about 10 years of trying, and it is to serve those who serve the poor. And that's why we call it the business of good, because all we do is we have 15 partners at any given time, in any given year. And what we do is we try to help people who serve, or nonprofits that serve the poor, John. We try to simply enhance their business skills. It's almost, it's almost like the mandatory that doctors have bad handwriting on their prescriptions. Nonprofit people tend to be lousy business people. And so we found our niche with going to nonprofits who serve the poor and helping them find better ways to build their revenue, better ways to make themselves more sustainable, better ways to keep the donations that they get and use them more impactfully. So that's what our foundation does. We do it primarily in three areas. One is first-generation college students. We created a software to create mentoring for them. Second is banking the unbankable. We do a lot of micro-lending. And third is we're trying to come up with ways to create alternatives to payday lending.
Okay. So I would encourage folks to go to your forum at emptyabundance.org online, and you also have a great number of practical lessons at the end of each chapter where you can tweet your own comments and share what you're getting from this book. I want to say to our listening public, Empty Abundance, Finding Meaning Through Mindful Giving by Tim McCarthy is a page-turner I couldn't put down, and it's got lots of life lessons we didn't touch on, lots of wisdom, and I encourage you to pick up the book. Remember that if you don't hear our show the 4 times a week it's broadcast, we can also be found on YouTube. You just use the search engine on YouTube and go to Good Books Radio Strong and Cook, and you'll find most of our recent shows there. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.